Ciao, my name's Josie and I'm an author of over 60 resources over the last 20 years, available internationally. So I'm actually at a late stage in my writing career. Makes me feel old. So yeah, I am now a scriptwriter, co-director and co-producer of my short film, The Great Escape Italian Style, or as we are calling it for short, TGEIS. Well, the script was first started out as a one-act play that I wrote 12 years ago, and it was inspired by a real car ride back then that happened with my Italian parents, the nonni, and my son, who was 17 at the time. And that's who the character Jake is based on. Therefore, I guess I naturally fell into the role of Maria, Jake's mother, Nonna and Nonna's daughter. I saw an ad on a platform called Star Now, and the ad was placed by a film producer wanting scripts to produce into films. So I applied, of course. I do these things and then I work out what's going to happen later. So, but I did mention that I don't have a film script, although I did study screenwriting 1,000 years ago at uni. But that if he was interested in having a look at my one-act play, I'd be happy to convert it. So we met up and we clicked, and here we are today producing this film. And we've worked out why we actually click and work together really well. Aaron is also a young man that was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when he was a child, so we work really well together. Okay, so the characters that are featured in The Great Escape Italian Style, we have our focus character, who's actually Maria. She's early 40s, recently divorced, single mother of a young teen. Well, he's in his late teens. They're both living with the Italian parents while she gets her life back on track. Unfortunately, her traditional Italian parents are just as smothering as when she lived at home as a young girl. But always busy. She's always busy. She's always on the go. She has 2 jobs. Maria's main focus and concern is currently her son Jake's mental health. So he has recently been admitted to a mental health hospital due to suicidal and homicidal ideation. The major antagonist is Jake, and Jake's about 17. He's Maria's teenage son, and Jake lives with his mother and his nonni, the grandparents. He has had mental health issues for many years, which have escalated since the separation of his parents, as well as from living with suffocating Italian grandparents. So when I wrote this, I did base Jake on my son at the time, and my son, who did have these mental health challenges and the Asperger's syndrome, but nowhere in the film do we actually mention autism, but that's an underlying theme that we're aware of, and it's the back of our minds that that's the character. A recent bout of suicidal and homicidal ideation resulted in him being forcibly admitted to the mental health hospital for treatment for his and the community safety, obviously. So he isn't coping in the hospital very well and has come up with an escape plan with the help of his mother. The major support character is Nonna, and he's in his early to mid 70s, a retired concreter, and now a pensioner who goes from delicatessen to delicatessen comparing pasta prices. He's a proud Italian migrant who not only speaks with a very strong accent but also refuses to wear his hearing aid, and he and his wife, Pina, continually bicker over small issues, as they have done the past 50 years of their marriage. So he still maintains the Italian traditions, for example, the homemade Italian salami, and he seems to have all the time in the world. Takes things slowly, doesn't like to be rushed. He and his wife are oblivious to their grandson Jake's mental health issues and assume that he's actually on a holiday. Another major support character is Nonna Pina. She's also early 70s, Maria's mother. And Nonna is a housewife and loving mother and grandmother. She also speaks with a strong accent as her English is very poor from a lack of integration within the the Australian community. She's had a tough life. She left her village as a young proxy wife to marry a man she'd never met, and she had to move to a land far away. Since her husband Jacobo, who was the proxy husband, retired 10 years ago, she's not had a minute of peace. So he has all the time in the world and she's gone the opposite. So normally a very quiet, patient woman, at times her passionate temper explodes, sparked by a tempestuous, pedantic husband. So most Italo-Australians can identify with the characters. They're the foundations of the traditional Italian casa. A nonna, who because of their long-term struggles of settling in an unknown country have held on to their culture and traditions for dear life and live in their little Italy bubble. So other than the nonno, then we've got the adult child who sits in between the generations, between their parents and their own children. So I call the Maria generation the sandwich generation, which is how I grew up. So basically we grew up embarrassed by our culture and yet strangely, fiercely dependent of it at the same time. It's really messes with our heads. Finally, the grandchild, that generation, with already a generation gap and communication challenges between them, they see their nonni as harmless aliens who aren't to be taken very seriously. Their nonni see their grandchildren as the futures that they never had, the fruits of their migration sacrifices, and therefore they feel they have the right to smother them. They came to this country for a better future and they see their grandchildren as that future. Nonna and nonno are based on my own parents, of course, and as a young couple, Joe and Margaret migrated to Australia in the early 60s, and because of their long-term struggles of settling in the unknown country, they held on to their familiar culture and traditions for dear life, living in that quasi little Italy bubble, which I saw in a very strong community in my country town. So Maria and Jake are actually based on myself and my son when he was a teen. And I was also that newly divorced single mother with a couple of teens and one of them who went through the stereotypical emo dark stages. So primarily I'm a storyteller, always was. I wrote my first book when I was 9 and put it in the school library. Secondly, I'm a comedian. I love to make people laugh. It just brings me so much joy. So I hope that people will be really entertained by this funny story. But there are many layers to my story. Even though it comes across as a comedy of errors, there's another world within it, just like that backseat bubble that my son and I sat in. And the other world is where Jake has a mental health condition or issue, and his sad world is actually overpowered by the comical antics of his grandparents, who've got absolutely no idea that he's been in this mental health hospital, and honestly, they wouldn't understand it anyway. So Italians, they're really a joyous, festive, yet hardworking and passionate culture and people. And growing up within that strong community, I learned that even in the darkest moments, there was always a way to get through. And they would use food and surround themselves with company, and they'd cry and they'd laugh, and I guess they'd be using the mentality and principles that they would use back home in their village. They're a real resilient lot, and because I'm proud of my heritage and culture, I also want to ensure that I respectfully deliver a hilarious dramedy whilst also peeling back some layers expose the tragicomic situations of all three generations. So I hope you'll enjoy the movie once we've released it, and once it's actually done the rounds of the film festivals. We're going to hold a premiere evening, and that's going to be too exciting. Thank you, and ciao.